All right, I think we are good to get started. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. My name is Jeffrey Landau, Director of Business Development with Agritecture. I am joined by the lovely Brakeley Bryant. Brakeley, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi all, my name is Brakeley Bryant. I've been with Agritecture and working with Jeffrey for about 2 years now. Excited to go over the policy guidelines for the future of urban ag today.
Awesome, awesome. So yeah, we are going to be discussing a few topics in our agenda: urban ag across different cities, the benefits of urban ag policy, a step-by-step process to develop policy, some successful examples of urban ag policy, and then going into our conclusions. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We would love to hear from you. We will be really looking at the US as well as some international examples. And we'll love to hear kind of your experience. So please share that in the chat based on what you've done in terms of urban ag policy, and we can have an open conversation towards the end. So to start, what we have found to be beneficial in our experience is to really define urban agriculture. And this is important because there are so many different stakeholders within the urban ag environment, whether they are practitioners, farmers, community leaders, activists, but also on the policy side. And it is very important to have a consensus on what is urban agriculture. So what you see here are three different examples of how it is defined here in the US. There is no set definition, but what we like to emphasize is that urban agriculture is the spectrum of technologies that can be used within the urban environment. Can be hydroponics, aquaponics, soil-based farms, rooftops, community gardens, vertical facilities. There are so many different technologies that could be used within the urban environment. We're not trying to limit or choose one. We want to ensure that all of these technologies and integrations are included when discussing urban agriculture, especially when it comes to policy. So you're not excluding one type over the other. It all is about the same thing: growing food within the urban context for those of us that want to enjoy, learn, experience more about what farming is, really trying to reconnect to our roots. At least in the US, less than, I think, 2% of the workforce works in agriculture. So a majority of us, don't have this experience of growing up on farms, of understanding what farming is. And urban agriculture is a great way to reintroduce, reconnect us to what life was like really before the industrialization of agriculture. So from there, what we're going to showcase is different urban ag policy in the United States. And, one thing to emphasize is that every city is going to be doing it differently. And there are some cities that are really at the forefront of urban ag policy, cities such as Atlanta, Philadelphia, Dallas, New York City, Washington, D.C., New Haven, Connecticut. And then there are some cities that are really just starting to understand what is happening within their own city limits. What does the community look like? And what can they do to best support and work with that community? So this is just a broad map of what's happening in the US. It's definitely not a exhaustive list of cities, but ones that we feel are definitely at the forefront of taking initiative and trying to be proactive when it comes to policy here in the US. And here you can kind of see a bit more of that detail. So Atlanta, for instance, was one of the first major cities to hire an urban ag director as part of their Office of Resilience. They have adopted new ordinances to improve their code to allow fresh produce sales. They are providing different parcels of land to new and existing growers that want to farm within the city. Detroit as well is also looking, or has done, urban ag ordinances over time to reuse abandoned lots to grow local food. And Toronto as well offers a variety of bonuses to encourage developers and individuals to use urban agriculture within their own local context. San Francisco, New York, Philadelphia as well Philadelphia has recently released their draft plan of an urban ag plan that is a pretty comprehensive, probably one of the most comprehensive plans I've seen so far, of really trying to understand who are the stakeholders in the city itself, what are their challenges and needs, and what can the city do in terms of creating a long-term framework to support, strengthen, and build the urban ag ecosystem within the city itself. New York City has its own Office of Urban Agriculture, and they recently hired their first urban ag director, who has been visiting a tremendous amount of local community gardens, school gardens, and different types of urban agriculture facilities within the New York City area. And San Francisco as well, providing tax breaks for properties to help individuals engage within urban farming. So it's very interesting and important to understand what each city is doing and how they're approaching it a little differently. Every city is going to have its own context, needs, and wants. And you can learn a lot from how one city's done it in different locations and how you can bring it to your own city. And then from an international lens, what we're looking at is, cities such as Toronto, the United Kingdom, Paris, Singapore, Berlin, all have taken their own approach to encouraging and incentivizing urban agriculture across their own cities. In Paris, the city of Paris implemented policies to help encourage rooftop farming and provided vacant spaces for those to apply to and grow within those rooftops. Singapore, through the Singapore Food Agency, has ambitious goals to really improve and increase the amount of production of food within its city itself. They are funding a tremendous amount of grants and RFPs to promote urban agriculture more on the high tech side, given just the size constraints and locations constraints of Singapore itself. And then we're seeing other cities such as Toronto, the UK, and Berlin really providing different policies and incentives to encourage rooftop farming, rooftop gardens, and urban farming within itself. So really cool to see, really interesting to see how different cities approach based on context of size, location, climate, and what crops are most relevant to the local population. But one thing is most important, and something that we want to really share, is that every state is going to do it itself, but there are some key steps that you can follow if you're considering urban agriculture for your own city. So I'm going to turn over to Brakeley, and she's going to run us through these steps, and we can go from there.
Awesome. Thank you, Jeffrey. Yeah, so as Jeff said, every city is going to have a different structure and different ways of writing their policy, right? For those of you that have worked in policy before, you know that it typically comes down to 3 areas. You want to identify what problems you're having, develop policy in order to solve those or amend existing policy, and then implement and evaluate that, right? So when we're talking about urban ag, we break these 3 steps down or expand them into 7, right? Because we really want to make sure that we're integrating with the existing policy structure, because very rarely, unless you're starting your own city from scratch, is there going to be nothing to work off of, right? So you want to make sure that what you're doing to improve urban agriculture fits in with the mesh of the city's framework already. So we begin with step 1, which is surveying the existing local community. We at Agritecture think this is one of the most important steps, if not the most important steps in urban agriculture policy, because agriculture as a whole affects everyone, right? We all eat, we all need our food to come from somewhere, and everyone is considered a stakeholder in both our food system and our agricultural system. So really touching base with what's going on in the local community and asking community leaders as well as urban agriculture stakeholders what the gaps are, what resources they're missing, right? Where they're having trouble with policy processes. Because a lot of these things as planners and urban agriculture stakeholders, we develop our own dialect and our own language in how to address them. And that might not be understood by, the common person trying to start their own community garden, right? So all of this jargon and language and processes they have to go through really create kind of a roller coaster ride, and making that more accessible and easy starts with asking people what their learned experience was, right? So this also comes down to how you're asking them. So does it make sense to issue an online survey? Would it make more sense to issue a paper survey, right? How are you going to make sure that you're getting a representative sample of the demographic that you want to learn from? Do you want to do face-to-face interviews, focus groups, or a combination of all of these? So these are all things to consider when you're really trying to get a sense of what's going on the ground and what's already there and what needs to be changed. So if we move on to step number 2 here, we then move on to data collection and background mapping. So step number 1, right, is more of primary data collection. You're really going out yourself, either with your team or, sending a team member out to collect either transcripts or surveys. Data collection and background mapping is more about taking secondary data sources. So these could be, demographic information from the census that's been released, or SOVI information, which are social and vulnerability index, along with other data sets that can be incorporated, such as, land opportunities, if there's land bank information or zoning information from the city, any community assets that the city has. Typically you want to go to their GIS department and see what's already there, and then mapping these out to see where there are gaps. So you can see here for our City of Dallas Urban Agriculture Plan, right? We gathered all these data sets and then mapped them out visually through a GIS system in order to see where the most opportunity was in the City of Dallas land for expansion of urban ag. So then if we move on to step number 3, then you have to tackle the city itself, right? And this can also take a lot more time than expected, because cities can be behemoths in the sense that they're tackling a lot of different things from a lot of different departments, and those departments don't always interface with each other or communicate with each other. And you have to be very clear about what you're asking in terms of urban agriculture policy and what you want them to do, right? So sometimes if you go to, the economic department or the housing department or the public works department and say, how can you improve urban agriculture? They might not even have heard of that term before, or really interfaced with those activities. So definitely taking what you've learned from steps 1 and 2 and kind of separating it into each department and mapping out how they all interface with each other is crucial to making this step less of a headache, right? Because otherwise you'll have to repeat conversations and go back and forth. So having a set plan of how all of these departments interact and how they're going to move the needle forward in terms of expanding urban agriculture activities and their benefits is very important to this step.
Just to add to this, so there was a question in the chat about how this relates to code and how let me just make sure I got this correct. How different systems, are realized within local policy. So, one thing that we've found within our own, research and work is that it's pretty important to define as best you can what is the difference between a container farm, a greenhouse, a vertical farm, a soil-based farm, because those different systems have different requirements when it might come to permitting, electrical, water, certificate of occupancy, that these different departments will have to apply a certain standard or permit or process for a potential urban agriculture operator to get a CO, a permit, whatever it might be. So understanding that, a greenhouse may be taking up a different size footprint compared to a vertical farm. A vertical farm might be in a warehouse space or in a different type of space. It might have different fire code regulations, electrical requirements. A container farm might be placed on an open plot of land. It might need some type of electrical hookup, water hookup. Understanding the difference between those systems will definitely impact how the code department, the water utility department, the city attorney's office might view that type of application when it comes to receiving a permit, a CO, or whatever they might else need for to be within compliance of a city. So it's very important when looking at policy to ensure that you're interacting with each department on how each department will interface with urban agriculture. And that was something that I think we found very interesting in terms of working with the city of Dallas, is that each department had its own interpretation. And it was our job to really build consensus as, okay, what is urban agriculture? What is a greenhouse? What is a vertical farm? What is container farm? And how does it work within different parts of the city when it comes to land use, when it comes to different commercial, residential, mixed use districts, so that the city can better support urban agriculture practitioners within the city itself.
Exactly, right. So when we talk about, concepts like wicked problems, in which there are a bunch of interconnected facets and components to pushing something forward or solving the problems that we heard at the community level, it's extremely important to have an agreed upon definition of what you're discussing in the first place. So just like Jeff said, discussing all of the facets of urban agriculture and what that means in terms of footprints and resources needed is crucial when discussing with city departments. All right, yeah, moving on to data analysis. Okay, so you've gone through step 1 and 3, and now you have an immense amount of data, both at a primary level from the community members and UA stakeholders you surveyed, and also at a secondary level, right, in your mapping analysis. And then further through your conversations with the city departments, right? So now's time for your internal team or your planning team to parse through all of that information. And this is a very crucial step. And if you've gone through a solid methodology of collecting all of that, this step will be much easier for you, in the sense that if all of your data is categorized, you can begin what we like to call a content analysis or a thematic analysis, right? So you start going through everything you've collected with your team and picking out themes. So what was common in what the city departments said and what the stakeholders said, right? What were the barriers that need to be addressed in order to increase urban agriculture activity? What other resources are needed? What market infrastructure? What network connections, right? So urban agriculture, like Jeff and I have said before, right, includes many different facets, and we like to see these as kind of a toolbox for the city. And so ensuring that you're integrating all of those different tools into the fabric of the city in a manner that not only meshes with what's already going on, but improves facets such as, the health, the economic status, the community building that's already happening on the ground is very essential when considering urban ag policy. So here we have some frequent categories that pop up in thematic analysis, right? So optimal land parcels, where would urban agriculture be best suited towards in the city? What city codes and zoning ordinances need to be amended to reduce roadblocks? And as Jeff said before in the chat, right, your planning team won't necessarily be directly involved in changing those ordinances, but they can advise on recommendations to the city, who will then rewrite it. Other things like building market infrastructure and establishing those network connections are also common themes that we have seen pop up in data in our work with cities. So moving on to step number 5. Awesome. Okay, so once you've conducted your data analysis, right, you should have some nice thematic buckets, which will give you a sense of where your recommendations should be going. So plans that we've seen, including in our own work, typically have no more than 7 steps or 7 recommendations. They can have a lot of subcategories underneath them, but remember that not only will the city have to digest this document, but the general public will as well. So you want to be very clear and direct and not too lengthy in the changes that need to be made, right? So as we said before, general buckets of recommendations could include policy and regulatory changes, market infrastructure, right? So where will this increased food go if you are doing horticultural activities on new urban ag sites? Does that mean, supporting retailers, CSAs, farm to institution connections and farmers markets more? Is there a chance for processing and value add facilities to get extra business from new farms or added production? Is there a chance for, prospective urban ag farmers to do some internships and really build a job training pipeline in order to support a workforce, as well as network building activities. So we classify these as both stakeholder engagement events, right? So farmers and urban ag industry professionals themselves, and community engagement events, right? We want the community to really get a sense that they were heard during the first surveying step, and that, all of the recommendations are meant to address needs or wants that they have voiced. And then finally, education, right? So you want to ensure that everyone has a chance to go through the knowledge sharing process that all of these activities will generate as well.
And just to kind of recap and share like what we did with the city of Dallas is that, we went through this process of doing, 50 plus stakeholder interviews with different groups within the city itself. So farmers, nonprofits, community food banks, the city itself, different agencies within the city, and really asked everyone, who should we speak to? Who is a part of this industry, this ecosystem, because we want to hear from them. Then we went on site and met with, a variety of different stakeholders to see what they're doing, firsthand on the ground, and to really understand what it is for them, in their day to day. And then through our analysis and drafting these recommendations, we then wanted to host different recommendation workshops so that we can workshop these recommendations with the community together. So, reduce regulatory barriers. What are the barriers for you as an urban ag practitioner when it comes to, this recommendation? How difficult is it to obtain a CO, a certificate of occupancy? What does that process look like? Does it include, site mapping, platting of a specific location? What is the cost associated with that? Are there other ways that you can get around, what might be a prohibitive cost to get a site platted if you're just doing, standard community or soil-based gardening? So really ensuring that we understand what that looks like for someone on the ground, so that we can build that recommendation into the plan itself, so that the city knows what they need to change when it comes to, this policy. Once we drafted the recommendations, we then held, an in-person session where we had big poster boards to showcase these recommendations and really have, the community come together and say, what do you like about this? What's missing? What's unclear? And what can we change? So really soliciting that feedback so that when we go to show and illustrate to the city, okay, here's the plan, we have really done our work in understanding what different practitioners want, what the community wants, and here are their recommendations, so that it's a more seamless approval process and that everyone on both sides is happy.
Exactly. And just one more thing to add there before we move on to some best practices. It's very important not to underestimate the time that it takes for some auxiliary activities in this step. So if multiple language translations are needed, right? If you have, for instance, in Dallas, there's a large Spanish speaking community. So we wanted to have our plan both in English and Spanish to make sure it was more accessible. Also, the design and formatting of these recommendations and how they're presented to the community for feedback is very important. You want to make sure that your feedback sessions are accessible to all, that, they're easy to read and digestible, and that the language is very accessible for everyone as well. And then Jeff, I'll pass it back off to you to run through some best practices.
So, through our work with the Dallas and also just our work within the industry itself, we've looked at other cities to understand what are they doing, what works, what doesn't work, and how can we bring that to different plans as we continue to promote and build urban agriculture policy, across, the US and other clients we work with. So, one great example I love going back to is the city of Atlanta with their Atlanta program. So this is run through the city's one Atlanta office, I think formerly called the Office of Resilience, and the Department of City Planning. And this website, I think, is one of the best websites I've seen that's run by a city, showcasing the variety of resources, programming, and events that the city offers to the urban agriculture community. So the website is atlanta.org, and you can access all that online. This is just some snapshots from the city itself, but they make it very clear as to what is the process to obtain the right grants and permits for urban agriculture within the city. What does the city require in terms of compliance for livestock, for bees, for an urban garden permit, for farmers markets? What is the process to apply for water meters or for getting a permit that allows you to grow food within a zone residential property? It has been probably one of the best resources I've seen in terms of anyone in the city can access this. It's very clear. It's widely available, and the city regularly updates it through their office. And the programs that they offer, for that I want to highlight, are really unique, and I think something that a lot of cities can do for themselves. So the city has one of the first own and managed food forests within the city limits, a 7-acre property that has, I think, 2 employees that the city has on staff to help manage and maintain it. But really, the community itself puts in a lot of work to own, operate, and manage this. The city really did its work to engage the community, understand what do they want within the food forest. It's actually a site that I've been to myself, and it's incredible to see so much life and activity within the city itself, growing food that anyone can go and be a part of. But it's not just the only initiative they have. They also have the Atlanta Grows a Lot program, which is a program that invites entrepreneurs, nonprofits, and residents to apply for a renewable license to adopt a vacant city-owned property to start an urban garden, urban farm within the city itself. A very exciting initiative that I think really addresses a lot of concerns that we hear from, I think, the industry as a whole around land access. So how can a farmer, get access to land to learn, to train, and to start? And the city is providing a program that allows them to do this. We have the Atlanta Grown program. So, a local marketing program that promotes farmers and growers through local food production. So having an Atlanta Grown label or stamp on your produce, illustrates to the consumer that, hey, this was grown within the city by a local grower. And that's a great way for the city to promote local growers and to help really sustain and be a voice and an advocate for growers within the city itself. And then there's the Food Matters program. So food waste reduction program, Atlanta does a great job at this. I've seen also New York City do a great job of providing composting facilities and drop-off points for residents within their farmers market program. So how can you reduce your food waste, but also provide and divert your food waste from the landfill to a composting program that goes back to the community growers, the community gardeners, and really helps with that closed loop system. And then another component that we love seeing is, the city also maps out different fresh food access within the city itself. And they provide filters that allows anyone to sort by different type, different EBT acceptance, when it's open, days open. And this is a widely available and free tool for anyone in the city to use. And we encourage other cities to create a tool like this to really showcase to residents, hey, this is what's happening in the city. Here are the different grocery stores, markets, farms, markets that you can access. And here's when they're open and what they accept. So really providing that information that allows growers to have better market access opportunities, but also informs the consumer as to where they can find local fresh produce within their city. And then really going into kind of like key takeaways for, what does a city need to do in terms of developing, comprehensive urban agriculture policy. And it's really looking at everything from land use to zoning, water quality, food safety, really engaging the community itself. Urban agriculture is happening in your city, whether you know someone doing it or you don't, but it's there. I mean, people are empowering themselves by growing their own food, and cities need to be doing a better job and being proactive in supporting that, making sure that policy is not prohibiting or limiting their access, their growth, um, and working with the community to ensure that there is, a strong, bright future to have that sovereignty and growing your own food. So engaging your community, the local farmers, the researchers, trying to understand what it takes to build, a local resilient food system, what role urban agriculture can play within that food system. So, urban agriculture won't be able to grow all the food for a city itself, but it plays a very imperative role in education and community building, and supplementation, and allowing residents to have the ability to grow their own food and to have that opportunity and access to local fresh produce. But I would say the education piece is also just as critical in that. So really teaching and showing young people, hey, this is where food comes from. This is how food is grown. It doesn't just show up on the grocery store magically. There is time and energy and effort that's put forth into growing fresh produce, fresh, healthy produce. And then ensuring that cities have adaptive and flexible policies. So a lot of cities have, antiquated or outdated city codes that they are going through the process of revising and adapting. And urban agriculture needs to be included in those adaptations. So the city of Dallas will be revising its city code. I've seen other cities, such as the city of Boise, that are looking at trying to build new code to better address a variety of concerns that are plaguing our cities: urbanization, affordable housing, but ensuring that fresh local produce can be grown within a city is just as important in those policies. And then creating the infrastructure to really allow those stakeholders to flourish and to build. So, what can a city do in terms of providing farmers market access? What can the city do in terms of reducing its regulatory barriers for fresh local produce to be grown? Can residents grow their own food on their own property, and do they have the ability to sell that produce, if it's grown in a safe manner? So this is also as critical, and another point that we want to ensure cities are looking at, are you providing the right infrastructure and resources that allows not just commercial growers, but residential hobby growers to grow food for themselves and for their community? And that's pretty important for us. That really kind of sums up our conversation. There's a lot more we can discuss within urban ag policy, and I'm happy to jump through different slides. So I would encourage anyone on the call to submit their own question or to reach out to us directly. We want to ensure that, we can provide the resources to anyone that is interested in trying to pursue policy change or trying to understand policy change within urban agriculture. There are a lot of amazing cities that are growing food and are changing their policy: Dallas, Atlanta, New York City, Philadelphia, New Haven, and more to come. So we want to ensure that, the information that we learn through our process, we can share with those that are here on this call and those that are interested in providing more benefits to their communities. So if you have a question, please put it in the chat or in the Q&A. We'll give a moment to see if anyone does. Hey, Catherine, good to see you. Hope all's well in Florida. I don't know if there's a question there, but I just see hi, Jeffrey. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just go back to some of the slides from different cities. So a lot of text allow people to kind of read through that. Yeah, so Catherine's asking about the overlap in county and city governments. So, what was interesting through our experience is that, cities only have so much authority and power to make change. When we were working with the city of Dallas, one thing that we learned is that, the county itself has a bit more leverage when it comes to different taxes and incentives that they can provide. So, we had interviewed individuals that were a part of Dallas County and really wanted to inform them, hey, that this is what we're working on with the city of Dallas. Here are a lot of the concerns that we've heard from different stakeholders. Here's what the city can do. What can the county do to help support, different tax incentives, development incentives, or other incentives that the city might not have leveraged in their own purview. So, that was something that we thought was interesting. And I think really the takeaway was to ensure that both the county and the city are talking to each other in terms of developing a new plan. But really trying to understand like who has the authority and the power to make change in policy and permitting and code was kind of the key takeaway. Understanding what the city can do and then what the county can do. Also in terms of, what other resources are readily available. So looking at ag extension, that might not be within the city's purview, but that is a resource that is provided to the county. That is also a critical part of how cities can work with different stakeholders within their city limits. Victoria's asking, how do cities and counties value urban agriculture in terms of why and how much they choose to invest in urban ag initiatives? So, one thing we found is that, there's this idea of like what is for the public good. I might be getting the phrase wrong, Brakeley, correct me if I'm wrong, but what kind of initiatives can a city provide that benefits the public, maybe not in a financial means, but in other criteria that provides value to the city itself. So understanding that urban agriculture, community gardens might not be, economic powerhouses. They might not be providing, a high number of jobs to a city, but they do provide a lot of public good in terms of community building, in terms of supplementing and providing, some fresh food access to residents of that local community. And that is important, for a city, for the health, the happiness of its constituents, of its residents, and trying to understand how a city can provide a fair or competitive lease rate for potentially a community garden, whether it's at cost or at some incentive, and saying that it's for the public good and define it for public good. It can go a long way in understand how a city might invest in those initiatives.
Yeah, so I believe it was public purpose. I mean,
Public purpose, yes.
Same, close enough. But also, when we think of these things, our food system globally is in the process of a major shift, right? Because people are realizing, especially after the COVID-19 pandemic, that having a integrated food system globally poses a lot of risk when supply chains face challenges, right? And so even though, like Jeff said, there might not be that economic, revenue or profit or payback that you want to see compared to other means of production right now, that might be coming in the future. But right now, what we're starting to see is the beginning of that transition. So it can help reduce even burdens on the health system, right? So people have more access to healthy food, or even just education around nutrition that comes with these activities. That can reduce the rate of food-related diseases. Can also help with certain environmental costs. So say, a city is really struggling with flooding and flood zones, and maybe they consider planting a food forest, or even somebody that's involved in urban agriculture, uses their skills to help increase vegetation elsewhere in the city to help with negative environmental impacts. These are all things that, city and county officials are very interested in, as well as that social cohesion that these activities can build, and really even, socially integrating individuals of different ages or immigrants or marginalized communities, right, that maybe have just come to the city and are looking for ways to get involved. These are all benefits that city officials are really attracted to when discussing urban agriculture.
So another great resource that we can provide. So Bruce asked about procedures or like a checklist. So we actually have a great blog post that kind of goes through these steps that maybe Sarah, you can put in the chat for everyone or put in the Q&A. Another great resource that we found very helpful is the Sustainable City Code website. And they kind of outline a lot of great city codes and case studies that really speak towards how can a city integrate, the right type of urban agriculture policy into its procedures. So, Bruce, I think I responded to your question. So you should be able to see that, and then Sarah will add in the blog post as well that you can review. And then let's see what else we have here. So Alexa's asking about pushback from city officials and residents during any of the steps of the process. And I mean, we received, I think, a lot of pushback and concerns. One thing to take into account is that urban ag stakeholders have been doing their work for some time, especially in Dallas, in New York City, in Philadelphia. They've been practicing, advocating, and working within their communities for decades. So, when cities go to speak with them, there's a lot of, I would say, maybe resentment or tension. And it's like, hey, we've been doing this work and now you're coming to speak to us. Like, what's taken so long? Or they've expressed these concerns already and, it's gone on deaf ears. So going into this process with a lot of empathy and understanding that, this is very personal to a lot of people. Growing food, health, fresh food access is a very emotional subject. So really coming into this ready to listen and to hear and understand where people are coming from, and really trying to build those relationships and trust is a critical step in this process. There were concerns around, if we provide fresh food to the public, would someone come in and steal food from these properties? Would someone take advantage of these programs? We've also heard concerns around, how can a city provide leases below market rate? Or how can the city take a loss? Understanding what are the budget concerns. So really trying to showcase and address what good and benefits urban agriculture provides beyond economic benefit is critical, and showing that, this is very much a long-term process. Urban agriculture in general takes time, is very slow, has like a natural cycle to it. And in terms of policy planning and business building, it just doesn't happen overnight. So it's really about trying to be consistent, empathetic, and persistent in the work when you're talking to city officials and residents about, what is urban agriculture and why it's important to you and your community. Damien's asking about codes for different small scale hydraulic farms. I don't know if I can speak to that directly offhand. I would imagine a 2-car garage in Brooklyn. You should be able to build your own hobby farm without issue. But I think if you're trying to grow and sell to retail consumers, there might be certain policies, permitting, or requirements that you might want to look into. So if you're looking at example of different small scale hydroponic farms within Brooklyn, Farm 1 is a good example of like a 5,000 square foot vertical farm within Brooklyn itself. There are also a variety of other operations in Brooklyn, whether they're rooftop or warehouse farms to look at. So a good resource you might want to check out is farming.nyc to see what different groups are doing within the New York City Agriculture Collective. Also, or go to the New York City's Office of Urban Agriculture and reach out to them directly. Ollie's asking about urban ag policy in Las Vegas. I have not seen anything from Vegas itself. Something for me to look into. I will have to get back to you on that, Ollie. Wish I could give you more there. And then Anna is asking, yeah, so we do have some context, Anna. What I might ask you to do is just email me directly. I'll put my email in the chat, and we would be happy to connect you with some different consultants in the Toronto area that might be of benefit for you. Great questions. Thank you everyone for taking the time to ask these. Anything else that we can help with? My email is jeffrey@agritecture.com. Brakeley's email is brakeley@agritecture.com. We are very easily accessible and would love to speak with each of you if you have a question or a concern or just information you want to share. And we really hope that this has been a beneficial webinar, and hope that you take this information and bring it to your own community as you continue to grow and build whatever business that might be. So I think we might have answered everything. Anyone else? Nidia is asking about urban ag for arid climates like Saudi Arabia. So, in climates like Saudi Arabia and the Middle East, we're seeing a lot more investment and growth in terms of indoor farming. So container farms, vertical farms, and greenhouses. Really understanding your climate is key in choosing the right technologies. So a variety of large scale hydroponic operations are being built in Saudi, whether it's indoor vertical farms or potential greenhouses. I think it depends on what kind of crop you're looking to grow and what the market's looking to purchase. So we do see a lot of investment and growth within the controlled environment ag industry within the Middle East, given that type of climate. So very interesting to see. Definitely a strong market case for it, given how much these countries import fresh produce. And I think we'll see that to continue to grow in terms of investment. All right, well, I think with that, we're going to sign off. So thank you everyone again for taking the time, and be in touch. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks all.